Listen to a howling roar.
I've done thousands of interviews in my career, but never one like this.
All right, brother, you ready to go?
Absolutely.
First like Max Afterburner.
It's like I've been thumped in the back by a giant hammer.
There's the light off.
The unreal acceleration pushes my helmet back into the seat,
There's 50 knots.
and within seconds, we're airborne.
We're rotating at 125. There she is.
Oh, yeah.
Griffin keeps up a dialogue with air traffic control while the plane banks to the right, turning south and flying out over the bay between the mainland and Pensacola Beach. We coast easily up to 3,000 feet out over the inlet to the bay, and then air traffic control chimes in with our clearance up to 14,000 feet.
Blue Angel 7, climb maintain 4,000.
Most planes will make that ascent over the course of 5 minutes or so, but the Super Hornet does it in 20 seconds flat.
All right, up we go.
Here we go. Oh, yeah, baby! Yeah!
With no warning, my reaction surprises even me. I am squished back into my seat like it's a rocket launch, and I cannot contain the giddy surprise that spills out of my mouth.
Oh, sorry about that.
Hey, it's all good. Hey, we're going to do a little zero-G pushover coming up here, all right?
Yes, sir.
All right, and here we go.
Ascending at upwards of 500 feet per second, Griffin eases us out of that climb into a shallow dive, and suddenly, I'm floating in my restraints. My brain struggles to mediate between what my eyes are seeing and what my inner ear is feeling, and I realize I'm grinning like an idiot as I sink back into my seat after 7 or 8 seconds of weightlessness.
Still feeling all right back there?
Oh, man, I would fly commercial a lot more if it was like this.
Yep, that's me. And to crib from a popular meme, you're probably wondering how I ended up in this situation. Thanks for coming out. Thanks for sticking around to the end of the conference. My name is Dusty Weis. I'm the president and founder of PodCamp Media. We're a branded podcast production agency based in Milwaukee and serving clients across North America. And I am also the host and producer of the Lead Balloon Podcast, a podcast where we tell notable stories from the world of public relations and marketing with the well-meaning communications professionals who lived them. And last fall, Lead Balloon became the first podcast to fly with the U.S. Navy Blue Angels Flight Demonstration Squadron. Now, we also embedded with the Blue Angels public affairs team and documented how they do their job, which I contend is the most elite occupation in the strategic communications field. Not only does this team create content on behalf of one of the most iconic brands in the world, but they do it under grueling working conditions and rigorous standards. And they're often called upon to ride along with the world's most talented aviators as they perform death-defying stunts that would literally make most people black out. What sorts of G-forces are you experiencing when you're flying in sets?
Well, it really depends on the mission. So it can range anywhere between 2 to 3 Gs up to our highest maneuver, which actually is our closing out maneuver, 7.3, somewhere around there. It's definitely, do you like roller coasters?
Oh yeah.
This is the most intense roller coaster you'll ever experience.
On adventure time.
When he reaches the plane, Bobby hands his camera to number 7 crew chief Cameron Tuzon and bolts up a ladder into the back seat of the plane.
Our 7 crew chief helps me get all strapped in. He does a little safety check, make sure all the harnesses are safe and tight and secure. Because we will be going inverted today, so I'm going to make sure I'm not hitting my head on the canopy.
And then, are you wearing anything else under the flight suit as far as like blood flow, that kind of stuff?
Nope, I just got my undershirt, my socks and boots. None of the pilots wear G-suits or anything, so in turn, we don't wear G-suits in the back.
Okay.
Something different, obviously, than what they operate with out in the fleet.
As I am a huge nerd, to nobody's surprise, I'm sure, in the room right now, all of this was a dream come true for me. From the day that I launched Lead Balloon about 3 years ago, doing an episode about the Blue Angels was my holy grail. But getting to take that jet ride, that was the fulfillment of a personal and professional aspiration that I have had for more than 20 years. So today, I am going to tell you how I pulled it off. I'm going to tell you what it was like, and I'm going to tell you about the lessons that I learned so that you are better equipped to pursue your own dream interview. Now, a couple things that you got to know about me first. I got my start in radio news. I started working in radio when I was 17 years old. We called it the Chalet in the Valley, but really it was a shack in a cornfield in rural Wisconsin. And it was a great start for a little person like that. But I've been working behind a microphone in one way or another for more than 20 years at this point. First 10 years in radio, starting in Madison, Wisconsin, and then in Miami, Florida. And during my career in news, every time the Blue Angels would come to town, I was in their inbox chasing that coveted back seat ride. Now, if you nerd out about this the way that I do, you're familiar with the back seat ride. It's sort of an institution in the world of broadcast news. The Blue Angels headline between 50 and 60 air shows every year, and when they roar into town for their practice run, usually there's one member of the local media who is invited to ride in the back seat. Now, the footage gets repackaged for the evening news, and maybe that person in the back seat has a blast. Maybe they don't. It's kind of a mixed bag, but it's a lot of fun to watch. And in all my years in news, I wanted so badly to get to be that news reporter. So when I reached the end of my run in news and decided to transition into PR and marketing, well, I did it with the sad resignation that it was probably never going to happen for me. So I spent the next 7 years working in public relations and content marketing. And then when I was working for the Association of Equipment Manufacturers, one of the world's largest trade associations, I was doing content marketing for them, and I pitched my bosses on the idea that maybe we ought to launch a podcast on behalf of the AEM brand. I had my background in broadcast, and so I told them we could do the whole thing in-house at no cost to them, and that part got their attention, so they greenlit it. We launched the AEM Thinking Forward podcast, and we set what we thought were reasonable goals for it. And within about 4 or 5 months, we had 10x'd those goals, and my phone started ringing. And it was other people from the industry saying, we really like what you've done with the podcast there. How do we do that for our brand? It was my light bulb moment. That got me to launch Podcamp Media, where we produce podcasts on behalf of brands. But I also figured if I was pitching podcasting as a tool to grow your business, I had better put my money where my mouth is. So I launched Lead Balloon, a podcast where we tell the notable stories from the world of public relations and marketing with the well-meaning communications professionals who live them. And I did that because that's where my potential customers are. I'm very often talking and pitching to public relations and marketing professionals, and from my time in that field, I know that we have sort of what I like to call a happy hour tradition in the field, where you get a bunch of strategic communicators together, and all we do is sit around and we tell the same damn war stories that we tell every time we're having a happy hour, about the time that we worked on a really high-profile marketing initiative, or the time that we had a public relations campaign just go completely off the rails, and it was an absolute, utter disaster. So I wanted to take these stories and repackage them in a virtual format that public relations and marketing professionals could take with them anywhere, because I knew that that would serve as a top-of-funnel content marketing tool for my business. At least, that's the official reason that I launched Lead Balloon, and from that perspective, it's worked. Lead Balloon drives 90% of the revenue that my company has now. But unofficially, I just hoped that it might get me that backseat jet ride that I never got to take. I'm only half kidding, of course, but if you look at the guests that we've had on Lead Balloon, you'll see that we have a long history of outkicking our coverage. Right now, we just dropped an episode about the greatest speech never given. It's called the Sapphire Memo. It was written by speechwriter William Safire for President Richard Nixon to deliver in the event, and this was a realistic possibility, that Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin got stranded on the moon and could not be rescued. This piece of American speechwriting history was lost for 30 years until it was uncovered by an LA Times reporter in 1999, and the story behind this speech is absolutely fascinating. So we talked to Dwight Chapin, who was in the room when that speech was written, about that. We also talked to one of the most famous brand Twitter account managers in the world, Amy Brown, who managed the Twitter account for Wendy's once upon a time. She basically invented snarky brand Twitter. We talked to a world-renowned political consultant, one of the most high-profile political action committees in Washington. And we talked to Ben Deutsch, the former vice president of global communications for Coca-Cola. We talked to Jennifer Hudson, who when she was 2 weeks into her job as a spokeswoman for American Airlines got sent to Colombia to serve as the public face of the company following a plane crash that killed 159 people. And we talked to Josh King and Kevin Sullivan, a Republican and a Democrat who both worked in communications at the White House, about the most infamous, terrible photo op of all time, Michael Dukakis in a tank in his 1988 presidential campaign. And I point this out because I just want to say that I actually landed 3 of those interviews while I was still working from my home studio in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. We hadn't even established our studio out in the real world yet. So how do you book big-name guests as a small-time podcaster? And yes, I am not too proud to admit that I am still a small-time podcaster. We were up for an Ambie Award for Best Business Podcast this week. We didn't win it, but we were up against Wondery and Pushkin and Fast Company and Atlassian. So I realize that I'm the mouse walking among elephants here, and it's okay if I get squished once in a while. But these are the guidelines that I have used to book big-time guests as a small-time podcaster. And the first is that you absolutely positively have to establish credibility as a small-time podcaster. All right? Tom Webster from Sounds Profitable. I'm certainly not the first person to shout him out this week, but I might be the last. Tom Webster wrote a great article recently about podcasting's curse of knowledge. And he was basically talking about the things that people think they know about podcasting and how that can be a problem for us. People are very bad at unknowing things that they think that they know. And so you need to work against all the things that your guests, your potential guests, think they know about podcasting. What do we think we know about podcasting? I hate these stereotypes, but we're going to run through them fast. That podcasting is unprofessional, that it is cheaply produced, that podcasters are not credible, which is a weird thing in an industry where the poster boy is Joe Rogan. That podcasting is a fad that's going away very soon, that podcasts have small audiences, and that it is a silly exercise in navel-gazing. Who said that? Your first job as a podcaster is to fight back against these stereotypes in everything you do. Now, I want to talk about gatekeepers really quick, because when you are chasing big-name guests, you are going to face a lot of gatekeepers. And I say that word has a very negative connotation. There's nothing wrong with being a gatekeeper, all right? We're talking about big deal people here. And gatekeepers have a job to protect busy, important people from having their time wasted, because everybody wants a piece of a big deal guest. But what those gatekeepers think they know about podcasting is going to be your problem. Now, the U.S. Navy Blue Angels, they had gatekeepers. Holy cow, did they have some gatekeepers. I'm going to tell you about that in a second here. The Blue Angels are essentially one of the world's most high-priced marketing initiatives, though. They've got 75 years of history. They were established to help build support for the Navy in the years after World War II and get a big piece of that federal budget. And today their annual operating budget is $40 million. And each one of those fighter jets that they fly in costs $50 million. I'll tell you this, when I showed up for our embed with the Blue Angels, I overheard someone on the public affairs team say, "Seriously? We're taking podcasters up in the planes now?" That's what I was working against to land this interview here. So you need to learn to speak the language of gatekeeping. You need to understand and accommodate the needs and the fears of gatekeepers. Also, I'm going to teach you this phrase. This is a good one to know. We are running the episode anyway, and we will note that XYZ was unavailable for comment if you can't get him for us. That one works great sometimes. But most of all, you need to demonstrate professionalism at every turn. Now, the next thing to remember as you're trying to land big deal guests is don't get tunnel vision. So what do I mean by that? Well, I very literally got tunnel vision during my interview with Blue Angels pilot, Lieutenant Commander Griffin Stengel, in the middle of a 7G maneuver that they call the minimum radius turn. I start my breathing, trying to get as much oxygen to my brain as possible, and put my head back against the seat. I know what's coming this time, and I know it's gonna hurt.
You ready to go?
Yep.
All right, coming left for the mid-range turn. Ready, hit it.
1,200 pounds of crushing pressure hits me all at once. Immediately I gray out, and I'm seeing the world from the bottom of a long, dark tunnel. I'm still fighting for consciousness and flexing my legs. Even my limbs feel miles away. I hear Griffin taking his own G-strain breaths, but to me, everything's echoing. Even the skin on my face is being dragged down to the floor of the plane, but slowly, finally, the pressure eases. Colors run back into my vision, and the plane levels off with the horizon.
Yeah!
Yeah, baby. Oh, my God.
Nice work.
As far as I know, that is the most fun that you can have while also being in incredible pain. But tunnel vision is what happens when you go too hard. In this case, I went too hard against the laws of physics, and I paid the price there. But it can also happen when you are chasing one objective too hard. As a podcaster, you should always be pursuing multiple topics and multiple guests for each one of those topics. Because guess what? Every guest that you reach out to is not necessarily going to pan out. And particularly when you are chasing big deal guests, you've got to have some irons in the fire. Now, there's a lot of work that goes into that. At the beginning of every year, at the beginning of every quarter, whatever cadence you want to do it on, you should be building out an editorial calendar for the next 3 months, the next year, however you want to set it up. And when I build my editorial calendar, I use what I like to call the rule of thirds. And that's basically every topic, every guest falls into one of 3 categories. I've got easy gets, and I pursue lots of those so that I can always have some content in the pipeline. I've got my stretches, my long shots. I might get them 1 out of every 2 or 1 out of every 3 times. And that's great because that gives you some higher profile guests to have on the show. And then there are the long shots. The 1 in 100s, 1 in 1,000s, Blue Angels backseat of an F-18 fighter jet opportunities, because you can pursue those and pursue those and pursue those, and they probably won't pan out, but if they do, it's epic. So as far as not getting tunnel vision goes, I wanted to ride in that Blue Angels fighter jet so bad, but you know who else I would have accepted a flight with? The Air Force Thunderbirds. And don't tell the Blue Angels, but I actually had a conversation going on with their public affairs team at the same time that I was talking to the Blue Angels public affairs team. But having multiple leads is not always enough. Now, the old saying goes that if the door won't open, try a window. Now, what you're seeing here, this is a very literal interpretation of that theorem from my reporter days when Wisconsin's governor illegally locked the media out of the building. It was certainly nobody's finest moment, least of all me right there looking like I'm trying to burglarize the place. But the doors were locked. So as members of the media, we tried a window. And then we tried another window, and then we found a window that we could actually get into, and that's how we got into the building to do our job keeping the public informed on that particular day. The point here is this: the minute you lose patience with a gatekeeper and give them a piece of your mind is the minute that that gate is closed to you forever. Now, I pursued my embed with the Blue Angels for 2 years. And during that time, I practiced patience and persistence. So let's talk about patience and persistence. How did I get to ride along in the back of an F-18 fighter jet with the U.S. Navy Blue Angels? Well, I did what we all do when we're starting this process. I filled out a form on their website. Now, unsurprisingly to anybody who's ever filled out one of these website forms before, that was a dead end. So, that's okay. We are persistent and we are patient. About 6 months later, I was working on a separate episode of the Lead Balloon podcast, and I was talking to the former communications VP at Boeing. Boeing, of course, the company that manufactures the 737, the 747, the 787 Dreamliner, which was its own public relations nightmare once upon a time. And we had a great interview, and then at the end of that interview, I mentioned to him how much I enjoyed talking to him, and hey, I've got this great idea for an episode where I would pair up and tell the story of the Blue Angels public affairs team. He agreed, that's a great episode. So he connected me with the former Boeing liaison to the Blue Angels, whom I also talked with, and he agreed, great idea. He put me in touch with the super secret email address of the Blue Angels public affairs officer, Lieutenant Chelsea Dietlin. Now, I emailed Lieutenant Dietlin in April. I didn't hear back. I sent her a quick follow-up about a week later. saying, hey, just want to make sure I'm not stuck in your spam filter, because that's a legitimate concern sometime. Still didn't hear back, so I let it sit. If you're badgering people for podcast interviews, you will piss them off and the gate will be closed. After your initial follow-up, let them be for a quarter. People get busy. Maybe we'll be better in June. And so I did. I followed up with Lieutenant Dietlin, and the first thing she said to me was, have you filled out the form on our website? Yes, I have. All right, now we're getting somewhere. This is great. So Lieutenant Dietlin and we had a long conversation. I explained my pitch to her. She loved it. She thought it was great. She said, here's some paperwork. I need you to fill out your NFDS speaker request form. We're going to get that triple stamped, and I need a medical clearance form from your doctor. And then get those things to me, and we are going to send them to the U.S. Navy Rear Admiral, which was another dead end. Turns out that members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff are kind of busy. That's okay, because we are patient and we are persistent. So that was in June of 2021, another year of quarterly check-ins and occasional responses, but it was entirely a dead end. And then in May of 2022, I received a pitch. Normally I ignore those, but this one was intriguing, and it vibed really well with an episode that I was already working on. His name is Dave Oates. He's a crisis communications consultant out of San Diego, and he is a former public affairs officer for the U.S. Navy. So we had a great conversation, Dave and I, and at the end of that, did the same thing as I did with the VP from Boeing. I said, I got an idea. I think it'd be a great podcast episode. How can I get into the back of that F-18 fighter jet? And he said, you know who you need to talk to? My old buddy, Charlie Brown, the Rear Admiral of the U.S. Navy. Now we're getting somewhere. He put me in touch with the Rear Admiral's flag aide, which is essentially a really highly ranked secretary, and within 2 weeks, boom, request approved. Now that didn't mean that the journey was over, which brings me to my next point. They have a saying in the military, and that is that crap rolls downhill. That's Crew Chief Cam Tuzon right there, and as a crew chief in the U.S. Navy, your job is to take care of one airplane. When you're a crew chief in the Blue Angels, that means that you fuel the plane, you turn the wrench on the plane, you make sure the seat belts in the plane work properly, and when you have a guest riding in the back of the plane, you make sure that they are equipped with airsick bags. And that's what he's doing there. And if the guest misses the airsick bag, guess who has to clean that out? Crew Chief Cam Tuzon. Crap rolls downhill, and when you are a podcaster with a big deal guest, you have to recognize that you have outkicked your coverage and that some crap is going to roll downhill to you. And in this case, just because I had the approval from the Rear Admiral of the U.S. Navy, it didn't mean that we were in business yet. We still had to schedule the thing to actually happen. They were going to be at the Chicago Air and Water Show, and I desperately wanted to do my ride along over the city of Chicago. It's right down the road from us in Milwaukee. It would have been great, but getting them to actually give me a time and place to show up was next to impossible. I had 2 videographers and sound recordists that I wanted to bring along with me. I needed to tell them when we were going to be there so that they could accommodate in their schedules. I didn't have a date or a time until 3 days before our actual embed with the Blue Angels. Wildly inconvenient, but crap rolls downhill. We rolled with it, we made it work, and then they told me, sorry, we can't actually do the ride along in Chicago, we booked someone else, but you can come down and visit us at our air base in Pensacola. So I spent a little bit of money on a plane ticket, flew down to Pensacola. Sometimes you just got to deal with it when crap rolls downhill. And another important tip is to have an original pitch. This starts with having a clearly defined audience that is relevant to your guest. If your audience is everyone in podcasting, I would posit that you are doing it incorrectly, because your guest has a message that they want to get out. They want to communicate with a specific audience, and if you can demonstrate that your audience is their audience, you are going to be in a position to win them as an interviewee. Also, framing an original pitch is everything here. They want a chance to advance their strategic objectives. In my case, the Blue Angels wanted to get word out to the strategic communications world that there are public affairs jobs in the U.S. Navy. It's not just about sailing on boats and flying planes. They need strategic communicators as well. I was in a position to help them do that. And so while the Blue Angels take up maybe 50 backseat riders every year, that's like lottery odds, getting one of those rides. When I talked to Lieutenant Chelsea Dietland, I told her my idea, and I was the only person who had ever asked to tell the story of the Blue Angels Public Affairs team. The Blue Angels Flight Demonstration Squadron headlines around 60 air shows in 30 locations throughout North America each year. And among their team of more than 150 Navy and Marine personnel are a small but extraordinary group of public affairs and media relations practitioners like MC1 Cody DCO.
So right now we're getting ready for the ground show to take place. Basically, it's our enlisted team launching the jets out. My job is going to be to go around, take photos, and create content for us to release later from that.
I hold my breath, and after a brief pause, 6 twin-engine Boeing FA-18 Super Hornets roar to life in unison. The sound quickly drowns out everything else at the airfield as Cody moves along the line, capturing images that will populate the Blue Angels social feeds. There's no chance of yelling over that noise, even with radios, so the crew chiefs signal the pilots using karate-like arm movements.
All right, now we're going to shoot the takeoff. Awesome.
Nobody had ever asked to tell that story before, and so when I did, it jumped me to the top of the pile. Now, the next thing that I want to touch on here, and excuse me, but I am going to get a little bit preachy at this point. Important people worked hard to get where they are in life. Their time and expertise are valuable, and they are not going to share it unless they know that you also work hard. Remember, we're still working against the things that people think they know about podcasting here. So you need to do the work, and that work does not stop when you land the interview. It involves a lot of research. You need to be able to demonstrate familiarity with the topic at hand, but also demonstrate familiarity with the person that you are talking to. If you are asking them the same questions that they get asked every time in every interview, it's going to be a boring interview for them. So ask those original questions by doing the research ahead of time. Also, you need to outline that conversation. Very often, guests will ask for you to share that outline with them ahead of time so that they can better prepare and look good. And this is one thing that really grinds my gears because I get pushback on this point from people. I tell them, you got to do an outline, and they say, no, it's not organic then. It doesn't mean that you have to treat your outline as if it's a script. I say, treat an outline like it's a series of signposts, the things that you want to make sure that you go past, but let the conversation dictate the actual route that you take. Finally, it is very important to review that outline. Review it after you write it. Review it a week before the interview. Review it an hour before the interview. Review it repeatedly, because sometimes having familiarity with that outline is going to save your butt. Now, I had my outline on paper for interviewing Lieutenant Commander Griffin Stangl, my Blue Angels pilot. I put that paper in my jeans pocket, and then when I arrived for my flight, they had me change into that flight suit that you see right there. And my interview outline stayed in my jeans pocket. Now, I had a lot of specific questions that I needed him to answer. And at 500 miles per hour, pumping adrenaline through my body, those were not the ideal conditions to recall what I wanted to talk about.
So, you're number 7.
Yep.
You have the job of being both the face and the voice of the Blue Angels Squadron. And I gotta say, from where I'm sitting, that's pretty much Webster's textbook definition of best of both worlds. And I just gotta ask you, as one guy that's made a life behind a microphone to another guy, are you a big talker who became an aviator, or are you an aviator who became a big talker?
Aviator who became a big talker.
Yeah?
Yeah, I mean, through flight training, you get the opportunity to, practice your public speaking. You give briefs, talk about flight conduct. You get to lead debriefs.
Condo 1-2, clear direct JD.
Honestly, this is a whole other level.
You wind up doing a lot of media relations as part of your job. Obviously, you're doing it right now. In the world of media relations, I've always told people, you can send out a press release. You You can write up a blog post, but the best media relations, I like to think, is in experience. What's lost in the media relations process if you're not able to give a media representative this first-person experience?
You know, the jet rides, we could talk about it all day, but unless you're up here experiencing it, you won't truly know what these pilots are putting themselves through the flight demo and all that, all the work they're putting in.
The point here being, I remembered just about every question that I wanted to ask him in spite of the fact that I was pumping adrenaline like I never had before any interview in my whole life. So outline it and review that outline. Know the questions that you want to talk about. Recording. This is not something that you can half-ass. I'm sorry, not if you want to land big deal guests. And so if you are recording virtually, please, for the love of Pete, record in multi-track, use some sort of progressive uploading technology, Riverside, Squadcast, something like that to make sure that you're capturing quality audio. I even send a microphone in the mail to the guests that we have on my podcast, on our clients' podcasts, just to make sure that we have good quality audio. And if you're recording in person, trot out the good stuff. Get the equipment. You want to, again, record in multi-track. Everybody needs to be on an individual microphone. Get some sound treatment on the walls if you can. This is the setup that I took along for recording the Blue Angels. I just threw everything and the kitchen sink into there. It was a pain in the butt to get this through airport security. But you have to remember, what does it mean to your big deal guests when they see you roll up and unpack that case of equipment right there? They recognize that you are a professional, that you take it seriously, and that you are going to do the work to make them sound good. Now, again, I hear a lot of folks, oh, this is going to take a lot of time and money, and that's the point. You're demonstrating that you're doing the work. Lots of time, some money. You don't have to have all the equipment right away in the beginning. You can build that up as you go along, but you need to show that you are doing the work. Now, another point that I want you to remember when landing big deal guests, be fun to work with. It makes you memorable.
Ready, hit it.
This time the plane rolls all the way over.
Oh, yeah!
Griffin pulls up hard, which, since we're upside down, actually points the nose of the plane toward the ground and puts us into a steep dive.
Trail if you look straight up.
This is incredible!
Yeah!
Oh my God!
Between fits of giddy yelling, I'm literally panting for breath, my head is spinning, and my normally rock-solid stomach is trying to recombobulate its cardinal directions.
Oh, you know, you can talk about that nonstop. You can get briefed, you can be told what to expect.
But until you do it.
Then when it hits you, that is not even what I expected.
All right, well, next thing I'm going to show you. This is going to be a low-G maneuver, but we're going to roll the aircraft as quick as it'll roll, okay?
All right.
All right, we're doing 2 rolls to the left. Ready, hit it.
The world rotates around us like we're a pig on a spit.
There's 1. And 2.
In 4 seconds flat, we rotate twice.
All right, a little pull as we bleed off some energy.
No roller coaster can compare with this.
I hope I'm not too annoying back here.
Nah,
This is the
man.
ride of a life, man.
Hey, I feed off the enthusiasm and energy, trust me.
Oh, God.
Let your natural enthusiasm for the subject matter shine through. Your guest will have a good time, and you will be rewarded for that as well. Now, I want to talk about music for a moment. You may have noticed that I had walkout music because I'm just that kind of guy.
Gonna take it right down in that balloon.
I knew from the start of this project that I had to have Danger Zone. But guess what? I cannot, under any circumstances, afford Kenny Loggins' licensing fees. That's just not going to happen. So I commissioned a couple of local musicians, Brian Koenig and Ty Christian, from the greatest metal act in the Midwest, Lords of the Trident, and I asked them to do a metal parody version of Danger Zone. Frankly, I'll go out on a limb and say that it rocked harder than anything that Kenny Loggins ever made. And so it made the episode memorable, but I also sent it ahead of time to the Blue Angels public affairs team, and they geeked out about it. They got super stoked, and I really do think that it helped move things along. Music is an opportunity to help your show stand out. Do not skimp in that department. Same thing with editing. And I promise this is the last time I'm going to get preachy, okay? But this is another area where I think that there is bad advice in the world of podcasting. People say, oh, I don't want to do editing. My podcast is about being real. I'm unfiltered, man. I'm authentic. Have you ever seen what a diamond looks like when it comes out of the ground? It looks like a piece of crap. But when a professional gets a hold of that diamond and uses all the tools in their toolbox, they are able to elevate the authenticity of that diamond and turn it into something that you want to wear on a necklace or on a ring. Podcasting is the same thing. Editing allows you to use the tools at your disposal to elevate the authenticity of your show. It makes it easier to listen to. It makes it stand out from a crowd. It makes you a better storyteller, and it makes better use of your audience's time. You have to assume that your guest is going to listen to an episode of your podcast, and you want them to be impressed by that. But also, for your guest, editing is a safety belt and an ejector seat. You wouldn't fly in an F-18 without safety equipment.
Anything that is black and yellow, you will not touch.
Got it.
Don't touch, and then above all, do not touch that.
He points to a big black and yellow loop in the footwell, the handle to engage the emergency ejection seat.
If you touch that, the canopy goes up, you goes up, and 7 ends up coming back in convertible. We don't want that.
I won't lie, all this talk about ejector seats is a little off-putting, but when Dale finally tells me it's time to walk out onto the tarmac, it's all I can do not to sprint out the door from excitement. We stride out between the double row of blue and gold fighter jets, sparkling in the rising sun, and every step feels surreal. I climb up the fold-out ladder and start settling myself into the well-worn back seat in front of a formidable-looking instrument panel, and Dale starts strapping me in with thick, heavy-duty canvas safety restraints. All are strapped in and tightened down as the trainer jets in the next row begin warming up for their morning flight.
Let your guests and their gatekeepers know that they can review and approve your podcast before the launch and that you are going to edit it to fit their needs. With that safety belt, they will be more comfortable taking a ride with you. Also, I want to shout out Jordan from Buzzcast here. They did a little bit of a discussion about this podcast episode when it came out, and one of our partners on the show said, you know, when I first heard about doing an interview in the back of an F-18 fighter jet, I thought it was the dumbest thing in the world, but the editing made it work. A well-crafted pitch. There is no one-size-fits-all here. Some people will tell you, I've got the perfect formula for pitching. No. The first rule of communication is you need to know your audience, you need to know what makes them tick, and you need to craft your message to them. But there are a couple of tips that I would recommend. Your pitch needs to be concise and compact. You want to make sure that you're not wasting anybody's time, but you also need an attention grabber in there. You also need to remember that pitching is transactional. You need to answer 2 questions that your guest or their gatekeeper might have. What is it going to cost me, and what is it going to do for me? That's where having a well-defined audience comes in. You can make sure they know they can connect with that audience, and you can deliver the evidence of your credibility. Part of that evidence of your credibility can be your past guests. When you're a podcaster, you can stack W's on W's by having big deal guests as evidence that you're a big deal podcaster. Also, it's important to remember that those high-profile guests can reach out to other guests on your behalf if you establish a great relationship with them. And so I often offer my past guests a report out on the impact that the podcast had for them. With the Blue Angels, I sent them this spreadsheet afterwards, where I was able to demonstrate that across platforms, the podcast, the YouTube, the TikTok, the Instagram, we were able to generate 100,000 hours of engagement for the Blue Angels. That's 11.4 person years of people watching that content. They were happy about that. It was worth the jet fuel that they spent to get that kind of engagement. So lastly, I'm going to end on one piece of advice here, and again, there's a particularly bad piece of advice that keeps coming up in podcasting circles, and that's, as podcasters, we don't need to worry about podcasting well, we just need to get out there and make more podcasts. Quantity over quality. That's good advice for learning. That's not good advice for publishing. I'm sorry. I would counter that with another piece of advice that I've been hearing for years, and that is dress for the job you want, not the job that you have. You need to put your best foot forward in your pitches, in your prep and research, in how you edit your episodes. I think back to my general manager when I worked in radio, Randy Hawk, and he always said, inviting someone to listen to your show is like inviting them to a party. If they show up and the music's too loud and nobody fun is there and they get food poisoning, they're not coming back to the next party that you throw. Podcasting is like that. If even one episode is C+, they're going to assume that that is how you do business. So you've got to do the work all the time, every time. Because I am from Wisconsin, I am obligated by statutes to end on a Vince Lombardi quote. But I think this one best sums up how we can battle against what people think they know about podcasting, how we can make the case to land our dream interviews. Because Lombardi said, we will chase perfection and we will chase it relentlessly, knowing all the while that we can never attain it, but along the way, we will catch excellence. The U.S. Navy Blue Angels take the same approach to perfection as Lombardi. In my flight with Lieutenant Commander Griffin Stangl, I learned an appreciation for that. These pilots and the crews, they are tough, they are disciplined, they are phenomenal athletes to do what they do. And getting to experience these things was humbling, it was a blessing, and it was no less than life-changing. The way that F-18 climbs and flies and maneuvers, it is perfection made manifest. Frankly, it has ruined flying commercial forever. I'm going to be miserable on my flight home because it's not that. So I owe the Blue Angels my gratitude, and I owed them no less than the very best storytelling that I could muster in putting together that podcast. I hope that hearing this story has inspired and empowered you to land your own dream interview. I appreciate your coming out, sticking around to the bitter end here. It has been a lot of fun talking to you. I'm going to be around all afternoon. I'm going to post up at the bar if you have any questions afterwards, but I am out of time. Thank you guys so much.